Can't do anything when I'm on Hangout.
Okay, we're live. Great. So hi everybody. We're going to get this started. This is actually the final conversation we're going to have in MOOC MOOC Critical Pedagogy. That's a MOOC that's been going on for the last 6 weeks or so. And joining us today are folks from Hybrid Pedagogy and a couple of extra guests here. So I'm Sean Michael Morris. I'm the director of Hybrid Pedagogy. And we'll go ahead and start with, let's start with Audrey, actually. Audrey, if you would like to give a short introduction, that'd be great.
Hello, I'm Audrey Watters. I'm a freelance writer. I write places all over the web, but primarily on my site, Hack Education. I write about education technology and how amazing and wonderful and revolutionary and disruptive and transformative it's going to make education. Except awesome. Not at all.
Except I was waiting for that part. All right, and so then moving actually from my left to right, I have no idea what order you guys are on other people's cameras, but Chris Friend, if you would introduce yourself real quick.
Chris Friend, Associate Professor of English. Assistant Professor of English. I just gave myself a promotion. Check that out.
That's how tenure works. It's just
it's that fast. It just sneaks up on you and you say whatever. And managing editor at Hybrid Pedagogy. And I'm shameless plug for Hybrid Pod, the podcast that started producing, 1 month ago. Great,
awesome, thanks. Jesse.
I am Jesse Stommel, and I am an assistant professor at UW-Madison and the director and one of the founders of Hybrid Pedagogy. And let's see, I will probably never get tenure because I've been advised several times that I shouldn't get into trouble until after I have tenure. And in my head, whenever I hear that, I think, that ship has sailed. So that will be my future. We shall see.
All right, cool. Maha.
I'm Maha Bailey. I'm an associate professor of practice at the American University in Cairo, and I've been a really big fan of hybrid pedagogy for a while, and now I'm a columnist. I'm not tenure track, so I get to play around wherever I want and have it be called research-like stuff. So.
That's awesome. Fantastic. And just a note as we start to get going here, MOOC MOOC is a MOOC that Hybrid Pedagogy has run now 4 times, 5 times? Is this the 5th iteration? This is the 6th iteration?
Is it really?
It's just never ends. It's one of the things that's really come out of MOOC MOOC, though, for us, what is the community. We've developed a really strong, very large network of people who participate in MOOC MOOC at a variety of different levels. I believe that's actually how we met Chris Friend in the first place, and I think that's also how we met Maha in the first place. It's really sort of fun to have everyone joining in, even at this level now, as we're wrapping up our most recent iteration of MOOC MOOC. So thanks, guys. Go ahead.
And I will add to that and say that from its germination, one of the first things I wrote about MOOCs is that I don't really care all that much about MOOCs. I care instead about the conversations that the MOOC gives rise to. And so I've been very happy to see that MOOC MOOC has given us lots of excuses, or that the MOOC as a thing has given us lots of excuses to talk about all the things that we probably should have been talking about anyway, and that and I'm kind of glad in a way. I mean, that's the one good thing that has come of the MOOC in a lot of ways.
Yep. So Jesse, did you want to get us started off with a couple of questions?
I do. I'm actually going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out a quote from Papert, and I am going to just lay it on the table for us to discuss. We're all good. There's a lot of good literary analysts in the room. I think most of us have some sort of literary analysis background, so we're going to put some Papert to the test. Yeah, he writes, but there is and this is in the introduction to Mindstorms, he writes, there is a world of difference between what computers can do and what society will choose to do with them. And this is actually interesting to me in light of one of the other things that he says several times, which is that he argues at one point that every child should have a computer. except that the computer should program the child instead of the, or excuse me, except that the child should program. Oh no, the Google has got into my brain. Except that the child should program the computer rather than the computer programming a child. So just to read this quote again, because I think that they connect. There's a world of difference between what computers can do and what society will choose to do with them. So my question to kick us off is, what can a computer do, and what has society chosen to do with them?
Who would like to jump in?
It sounds like a question for Audrey. That's why I'm staying quiet.
You knew that was coming, Audrey.
Yeah. So I think that Papert was really sort of, he could already see the way in which education technology was being developed, and he says, to sort of run children, learners through the paces, right? So that the tools that were being developed were really ones that were about making instruction as fast and as efficient as possible. That's sort of an early way of calling, like, it was called personalization, but it was really about how do we use computers to streamline the delivery of content and assessment to students. And so what I think he visioned by saying that every child should have the power to be able to manipulate these machines on their own was that students, learners of all ages would be able to build mental models with technology rather than have their brains filled with the knowledge that society deems. And I have to actually make a quick note here. So he invented this programming language, Logo, to help children learn programming in 1967. And I think roughly 1967 was the same year that one of my favorite Star Trek episodes came out, called Spock's Brain. And I'm devastated today that to have learned that Leonard Nimoy passed away. But in Spock's Brain, this notion of having this machine that can sort of inject learning into people's brains was really the sort of common idea. And Papert was really adamant that we shouldn't be in charge of sort of delivering knowledge through technology, that we should be about building and constructing knowledge.
Interesting. Responses?
I actually have a question, because I started reading Papert because of Audrey, obviously. And I kept reading it and thinking, well, aren't we getting close to that point where the computer is no longer programming us, and we can choose to program it without being a programmer, I mean, in the ways that we use technology now? Or is that an illusion? So, again, sorry, it's a question for all of you.
Yeah, I'll take that one. I would almost argue the exact opposite, that as technologies have been developing and devices have been, I guess, remade in different iterations over time, the goal seems to be in simplicity and power, and combining those two together. And the simplicity that we see isn't necessarily in what the devices are able to do. They get additional features with every iteration. The simplicity is usually in terms of the interface, making the device look as though it's simple, look as though it's easy to use, look as though it's unoffensive, and that sort of thing. And yet, the design that has to go into it and the capability and functionality of the devices themselves continues to expand and get increasingly complicated. And so there's this divergent trend where the interfaces are supposed to be simpler, the power is supposed to be more complex, and the end user gets left out of that. We are supposed to believe that our computers are easier and easier to use and can do more and more, instead of being encouraged to better understand how they work, better understand what we can do with them, better understand how the inner workings hold together, and where we can go with the new power that the devices have. Of course, power is probably the wrong word to use in this conversation, but I think it's almost a charade of trying to make things look easy. And
that's the iPad, right? Like the iPad, Apple tells us the iPad just works, right? It just works. I mean, it is actually, like, you don't ask any questions, and you can't take it apart. You can't, you need a special tool that isn't for sale, commonly for sale in order to take your iPad apart. There's not an operating system or a command line that you can get to and program your iPad. We're just told that it's an easy-to-use device. Don't worry about it. And you're trapped in this, trapped in sort of Apple's hardware and software and application ecosystem that trains us to be consumers of that, but it doesn't actually give us any capability other than buying things.
And then buying other things that are also a part of that same ecosystem, because those are the only things that we feel have the capability of doing what we need to be able to do. Something gets into that ecosystem, how do we get it out again? Buy more of their stuff.
So I'm gonna throw something in here and try to connect it back to the idea of pedagogy too, and that is so hybrid pedagogy often has conversations about critical pedagogy and the ways that student agency is really important, and students being able to take control of their own learning and kind of push their own learning in the direction that's right for them. We talk about that a lot. And we often get sort of pushback because people are like, yes, but I want the teacher to tell me what I'm supposed to be doing. I want the teacher to explain their expectations. I want the teacher to, I want the teacher. And so there's a sort of dependence on the teacher. Okay, now to tie that back to the Apple thing, I like going to the Apple store and I like Apple products. And so I'm playing this side of it, right? What if, as a critical pedagogue, I'm also an Apple consumer? So, like, how do I balance that? How do learners balance this idea that they should be able to take learning into their own hands when they're accustomed to not doing so? How should consumers of computers be able to take computers into their own hands when they are accustomed to not being able to do so?
I've been thinking about this with connection as you're all talking to Legos and what has happened to Legos as a thing and how Legos have changed over time. And also I think it's interesting to bring up Legos because there's been a lot of talk about Legos and gender issues and race issues and sort of identity politics. But the reason I'm thinking about Legos is just having watched the change in Legos since I first started playing with them to now, and I've become a sort of renewed Lego fanatic, and I've now started collecting Lego Lord of the Rings sets, and I do the Lego Lord of the Rings sets. When I was first playing with Legos, I always would get the sets, but I actually never as a kid built a single set that I got. I never built what I was supposed to build. And yet, since I've bought Legos as an adult, I've only ever built what Lego told me to build. And there's something, and I can say a few things about that. There's something about the way that the marketing is telling me more forcefully to build a particular thing. And there's also something about the nature of the pieces themselves that has changed since I first started playing. That the pieces are more proprietary, that the pieces do less things. I remember Legos when I was a kid, I would build fortresses with them, and it felt like every piece was a window to something, a window to anything. And that's what my relationship to Legos were. Now it feels almost like every piece is telling me exactly where to put it, even if I didn't read the instructions for the Lego MOOC MOOC. Lego MOOC MOOC. Well, he is a Lego. For the Lego Lord of the Rings set that I'm building. And so then what I wonder is, if as these systems tell us more forcefully what to do with them, if what we have to be is we have to be even more sort of disobedient in the face of these systems. It's not to say that we can't be disobedient with an iPad, but that the systems are designed to decrease our likelihood of being disobedient with them.
I mean, and this is what Papert argued as well, is that, you know, that although he saw computers, so Mindstorms came out in 1980. He'd been working since 1967 on Logo. He saw computers as having this capacity in them to radically transform how teaching and learning happened. But then he also recognized that institutions, such as school, have an amazing capacity to squelch that, right? And so we have these sort of institutions that really don't. And the initial question was about what does society want computers to do? Well, society is going to actually want computers to probably not fulfill their sort of radical potential for all of us. That society is actually going to want to replicate power, replicate systems. And I should say that Lego actually named their robots after Seymour's book. So the Lego robotics is called Mindstorms in honor of this notion of being able to build and play and engineer.
I want to go back to how Jesse started his example of the Lego sets, where he's complaining about his current set, which is a Lord of the Rings Lego set, which that name alone bothers me. Like the idea that you can have a Lego set that is designated as a particular franchise. To me, that goes against the idea of building my own thing, which is what I would want Legos to be able to do. If I want to make my Lego set into Lord of the Rings, I'll do that myself in my own imagination. Thank you very much. I don't need the little stickers on it or the custom-shaped pieces to be able to make that into whatever they wanted. I was also thinking of whenever I first got a computer way back when, the first one that my family got, I ended up reading the manual for it, front cover to back cover, with every single command that you were able to issue on the command line, because it was so new, and I wanted to soak it all in and understand what it was capable of. And I don't think I've touched a single manual since, because now, instead of saying, here are the different options you have, it's, here's what you're supposed to click to do this, here's what you're supposed to click to do that. And I think, as taking it back, Sean, to the classroom, where a lot of the software and hardware that's available these days is designed to do one specific task, and it says, do this and it will be simple. I think the challenge needs to be task students not to accomplish a particular task within a particular piece of software, but it's to accomplish a larger goal and to use software and hardware however they see fit to do whatever they need to get the students more invested in the decision about how to use and how to incorporate the software. And that too much of the design of technology now is being too restrictive to fit a specific need.
Interesting. So I was just at a conference, the ITC conference in Las Vegas last week, and Richard Edwards, I think, was speaking, and he said something that I wasn't sure. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. He said something about that LMSs shouldn't actually be easy to deal with. They should, in fact, be complicated to deal with because it challenges users to hack the system to make it easy. It's sort of like Apple, right? It's sort of like everything's easy on Apple. Well, what if things are more complicated? What if things are harder? What if things are more like Windows? This
MOOC MOOC chat is brought to you by.
Yeah, right. And so that we actually have to think harder in order to use the system, because that way it initiates a sort of more creative process or engagement. Does that make any sense? I mean, this is what he was saying, was that LMS should actually be very difficult to use so that students and learners have to really engage in a deep way to figure them out.
That seems like putting the obstacle in the wrong place, though. I mean, I want students to be able to think deeply about what they're learning. I don't want them to have to use some piece of shit technology that's difficult to use, because that's just another sort of barrier to entry that we do. I mean, I'm not sure that making the LMS is the right thing I'd want to complicate for them. Sure. I mean, that seems like, I mean, I feel like we need, like, the LMS is so far away from being designed for its users, right? Designed for students and teachers, that making it a worse piece of software, that's wow.
I agree.
Really?
Can I give a non-digital example of what I think a good learning tool should be? I think it should be more like Play-Doh, so that it's the learner, you know, molds it however they want, mixes it however they want, produces things from it that you wouldn't expect. You know, connects it to other things. So if we talk again about the iPad doesn't connect to anything except particular Apple devices, and that's just extremely frustrating. And yeah, I mean, you can only do with it what they allow you to do with it. They're not friends with Google, so the Google things don't work well on the Apple things. But Play-Doh is good with everything. I mean, when you put when you put Play-Doh on Legos, they create problems. So the Legos don't work anymore, but you learn when you stop doing that. I have a 3-year-old, so I see this all the time.
Yeah.
But to me, I think. Go on.
Yeah, you make a good point that I mean, I remember Play-Doh when I was a kid, and thinking, this doesn't do anything by itself at all. Like, I have to do something. It just lays there. and it's kind of sticky. And so I didn't like. You have to then play with it and figure out what it is you're going to do with it. And then there's all these things you can do with it.
And I think to continue from that, though, a lot of the problem here with the LMS and making it the frustrating point of entry is the different kinds of interface and the different kinds of entry points that we have, where if a system is too hard to use initially, people aren't going to want to use it. And so if an LMS is hard to use, students are just not going to engage with the class through that environment. So making it harder is going to prevent students from engaging. If we make it easy to use, but then can kind of step it up. Once students are accustomed to the interface, the simple version, make it more challenging or make it more complicated or more involved, have more features thrown in gradually, then we could develop a more advanced interface to allow for more functionality as students develop their awareness. And I was thinking with the Play-Doh idea, you open up your first can of Play-Doh, and yeah, it just sits there until you start playing with it. And at some point, you're like, ooh, if I only had this other tool, I could do so much more with it. And then you go get, a knife, and you start chopping it up. And then you can, if you wanted to, go to the store and buy a new little set that you could squeeze the Play-Doh out of things and make spaghetti out of it and all that. But it allows you to grow with your creative ideas, but the entry point is simple.
I mean, and I would add to that one of the things that we don't do currently with the LMS is that we don't actually let the student look behind that sort of programming curtain, right? All of that is sealed off. Students aren't allowed to program against their own sort of LMS interactions. They aren't allowed to have access to their data programmatically. They're not able to look at the source code, or I mean, with a few exceptions, I suppose, like they really aren't allowed to look at the source code and use the LMS as an entry point to be able to build a mental model of how the school works as an institution and how that institution works technologically, how power and data flow between the student and the class and the teacher and the department and the administration writ large. So looking at the LMS as a mental model to build, for students to be able to think about the structure and infrastructure, architecture of the university would be interesting, but that's not making the LMS more complicated. That's actually making it more transparent and making the inner workings of a classroom and the university something that students can get in and sort of take apart.
Well, what's interesting is when we teach something like literature, we do have the conversation about what's the nature of a book. What happened? What direction do you open a book? What materials is a book made? What is the history of a book? This would be a very common conversation that we would have in a literature class, and it would also get at the heart of the nature of the work, that it would be part of the work that we were doing. But how often, how many classes does someone look around the LMS and say, okay, let's talk about the system that we're sitting inside. How is it changing what we're doing with it? How are we interacting with it? So there's almost a sort of the first rule of the LMS is that we don't talk about the LMS. This sort of idea that somehow the LMS is not something we discuss. The LMS, even just the idea that the LMS is supposed to be invisible, I don't necessarily think that that's the answer. I mean, in fact, the answer is maybe the reverse, and this is to reiterate what you're saying. We don't just imagine the book is invisible when we're talking about literature. No, instead, what we do is we talk really concretely about the nature of a book, and we smell books, and books have a real tangible, visceral part to play in our conversations about them.
And God forbid we should have an online class where we all meet in the LMS and we believe that that is the space we've been given and there is no way out of it or no way to change it. Whereas if we're in a physical classroom, one of the first things we do is look around and comment on how fantastic or crummy the environment is, and we adjust it as needed, walking outside if conditions warrant. What's the equivalent of walking outside in LMS?
What we're doing now, I guess? Although it's still inside some other space. In the Twitter chat the other day, people were talking about, I think it was Sean who actually said Twitter as more agency than LMS. But then even within Twitter, you're still restricted to whoever's on Twitter and to 140 characters. But it's just that because it's not used in an institutional way. Because that's the other thing. We're talking about how society uses the technology. So, I mean, the technology itself of something like Twitter is restrictive in a lot of ways and hegemonic in so many different ways and could be really used in ways that are destructive. But it's the way we use it that makes it radical or makes it, because it's not institutionalized that way. Or the way like some of us use it that way.
It's still actually, to come back to Jesse's metaphor earlier, actually is still giving us set pieces of the Lego set, right? So that one of the set pieces that we're stuck with when we build on Twitter is that 140 characters. And I think that a lot of the tools that we use, particularly if we're using these, these tools that are built by major corporations like Twitter and Facebook and Google, they really do restrict the building blocks with which we can build our online digital selves. I mean, and I think that, for me at least, the space outside the LMS is actually a space that you own yourself, that you built yourself, and that you think about controlling yourself, so that you can build it with these small, individual, hopefully open source, right? Open source, non-proprietary building blocks, so that you aren't stuck with the proprietary building blocks that the companies want us to build and shape our identities with.
Yeah, I was going to show here I've got Lego Legolas, who is one of my favorites. But the interesting thing is that as we're talking, I'm thinking about like what I can do with these in order to remix them or to make them my own, if you will. And I can take off Lego Legolas's hair. And look, I can even turn his head around so that he's happy. Ooh, look, now he's happy Legolas. And look, I can put Gimli's beard on Legolas. But the thing is, like, the degree to which I can actually remix these things is very, very minimal. I can make small, subtle changes that don't necessarily change the nature of what these things are. And in fact, there's a way in which I felt almost ashamed when I just put Gimli's beard on Legolas, and I very quickly made him back into Legolas, because there's something about sort of the ideological character about this thing that's been made for me, and that has been reiterated every single time I've watched this movie, that essentially just says, don't change this because there's something sacrosanct here.
This reminded me of myself as a child. With Barbies, I got sick of the Barbie thing, and I started to create my own paper dolls. So I would create the doll and dress her however I liked and create paper clothes for her and all that, so that I wasn't depending on anyone else to provide that entertainment for me. I wanted a party dress, I made a party dress. I wanted it blue, I made it blue. I didn't have to depend on buying it, and it was free. I could just use, well, paper and pencils, you know. So the thing is, like, trying to do something like that on a computer is possible, but then there are all these tools that would make it automated, where you just pick from a wardrobe rather than create it on your own, or you pick the palette from a palette that's already there, even though you probably have pretty much all the colors under the sun, but you don't experiment by putting things on top of each other and finding out what happens. But I think it's possible with computers. It's just not there. I mean, it feels like just within our reach to me.
I want programs and operating systems and such to have a behind-the-curtain button, to have something where I could peel back a layer of the interface and be able to see what's hovering beneath the surface, and then even behind that layer as well, to be able to understand what's going on.
The gears, right? That's what Seymour would say.
And Sean was saying earlier, how can you be an Apple fan as a critical pedagogue? I mean, I even worked for the company for a time. I drank the Kool-Aid, totally. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed is the fact that I can restart my Mac to a command line interface. And I would always do that in the store to just blow everybody's mind. So, like, wait, how is this now a Macintosh? And just the idea that there is that subsurface layer there that I can just drop down into anytime I want to get into the guts gives me that ability to muck with what's designed. And to me, there's a level of comfort behind having that dual approach to the same system. And I would like to find ways to get our students more comfortable with exploring that option, and to understand that that's available, and to be more comfortable with the abilities that provides them, to say no to the interface if they don't like it.
One of the things that I think is often resists this is the sort of division that's created between instructional designers and teachers, the division that's created between educational technologists and teachers. And I'm wondering how we bridge that divide, or if it's even possible to bridge that divide. What I found is that divide is often very, very thoroughly built into the system, so that it's really difficult to collaborate across those lines.
I'm a faculty developer, so I work with that all the time, because I also teach and I'm a faculty developer, and there's a double power thing also going with that, right? So it's like as if the instructional designer has the power that they know more of what they're doing, but they don't really know what's happening in the teacher's context. And there are all these issues of control and evaluation and so on. And no matter how well I help you design your course, I'm not going to be with you in that class every time helping you do whatever, because you need to react to your students the way that works with you. And there's there's your own philosophy of teaching or whatever. And then on the other hand, there's the power of like in a university, obviously a faculty member whose tenure track has more power than me. And it's that very strange struggle there. I'm not really sure what it's got to do with technology, except that I know more about technology than most faculty. So they sort of need me if they want to use technology. But because I also teach and I'm a faculty developer, and there's a double power thing also going with that, right? So it's like as if the
RL, you might want to mute your. I think you'll need to mute your audio or put in a headset.
Context, and there are all these issues of control and evaluation.
That's an impressive lag.
No matter how well
I'm going to go ahead and mute you for now.
Okay. So we've just been joined by R.L. Goodman, by the way, for everyone. Do you want to see if Jesse? Do you want to unmute her and see?
Yeah, no, I'm texting with her to help. So go ahead.
Oh, okay.
So
I'll try our unmute her and see.
Oh, okay. Well.
No, it's not letting me unmute her. So go ahead and I'll figure it out.
Okay, go ahead, Audrey. What were you going to say?
So I was going to respond to Mahaz about how it is involved with technology. As I've been thinking a lot lately about some of these pieces of history of education technology, and I actually had a chance to talk with Apple earlier this week for a story I wrote about how Steve Jobs managed to get the Apple IIs into the classroom. And I was thinking about what happened in the late 70s and early 80s. What happened between that moment when Apple was really the leading piece of hardware in schools, in K-12 schools, and it was really focused on using logo, and oftentimes using logo, doing programming. What happened that somehow computers became not that. Computers became more increasingly, again, used for keyboarding, used for assessment, used so that students could learn how to use productivity tools. And some of it had to do, I think, with the increased number of computers in the classroom, that the control went away from being an individual teacher who was really interested in using technology to do something completely different in the 1970s and 1980s, to being something that the administration and the IT department controlled. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is I think that individual teachers have less say over what their technology usage looks like, and we're stuck with education technology looking more like an administrative tool, and that's what the LMS is, right? The LMS is not a teacher tool. The LMS is a tool that the administration and campus IT asks instructors and students to use. And I think that that's a big shift, is who's making the decisions about what technology and how technology appears in the classroom. And it's definitely not a pedagogical decision, right? It actually is about administration.
I tried to mix that up a little bit recently and have my students use whatever devices, whatever technology, whatever software they chose to use for a particular activity. I said our end goal is to make a video and post it online somehow. And the amount of surprised uncertainty in the faces surprised me, really, where they thought of, make a video, well, how do I do that? And there was this expectation that I would say, you use this program, you go through these steps, and you do this thing. And so I tried showing a couple of options, and I've had to steadfastly refuse to repeat the steps since then to make sure that they didn't fall into the routine of wanting to replicate what I'm doing. But I found that the fewer suggestions and restrictions and such that I put on them, the more comfortable they are with what they're trying to do, as long as they know that they have the ability to just use whatever tool is necessary. And so there is that discomfort with trying to explore, but that also leads to the opportunities to find solutions that work for them.
So I have a question that I'm going to throw out to the group, and I'm also going to try and unmute RL in a second and introduce her. But the question that I want to, well, let me go ahead and introduce RL and make sure this works, and then I'll throw another question at everybody. Let's see if I can unmute. No, that didn't work.
Nope.
You might have yourself muted, RL.
Yeah, she must have herself muted.
Up in the top left. Top center left. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and throw a question at everybody. So the question is, I'm going to throw another quote from Peppard out. Peppard insists that computers should not be seen as, quote, agents that act directly on thinking and learning, but rather that the most important components of educational situations are people and cultures. I think this is a really important bit to talk about. There's a couple different lines here that I think are fascinating. He says, agents, computers are not agents that act directly on thinking and learning, but rather the most important components of educational situations are people and cultures. This suggests to me that in a way, there's something about the Lego pieces, that computers aren't actually the Lego pieces that we fit together, that in fact it's people that are the pieces that we fit together. And I wonder if there's a way in which thinking about technology and thinking about computers and thinking about the gears as the pieces, or the Twitter or the Facebook as the pieces that we put together, is to sort of miss the point that it's actually the people that we're bringing together inside of these systems. So I wonder if we can talk a bit about this cultural bit. And the other question that I just saw, as we're sort of leaning towards it, the next question I'm going to think about is the question of sort of gender, race, identity, and how these things fit inside of the world that Peppard describes. You should be unmuted, RL.
Unmuted, yeah.
I should be here. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay.
So, just so a brief introduction, RL Widman is a mentor of mine from CU Boulder, and she taught her first online class, I think, in 1993.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Completely online, yeah.
First completely online course in 1993. I think she's worked in just about every learning management system and has shook her fist at every single learning management system as well.
Including Moodle. Could I just drop in a comment in response to what Sean was saying about that person who said something about make LMSs harder?
Sure.
Does he teach?
Yes, it does.
Well, as Jesse just said, I've been through this for years at Colorado Boulder, and the mere concept of wanting students to cope with something harder makes me want to scream, because we had so much trouble, one, with connectivity to begin with, and then two, just with how to negotiate in these systems that were not user-friendly for a very long time. So I think it would just be silly to go back and make them more complicated for the users. We now, of course, in college have students who are well accustomed to using computers, but Jesse and I have been through the days when students didn't know much about computers and had to struggle, and just the problems because of the mechanics of learning management systems were sometimes almost overwhelming to the students. Fortunately, they're better now. That's just what I wanted to say. So, Sean, that guy you were talking about, whose name I have unfortunately forgotten, should put it in his pipe and smoke it and go away.
Well, and in all fairness, I took that out of context from a keynote that he delivered, but he had a lot of other good things to say. But that one had stood out to me as being difficult to sort of deal with. But to tie that back to the question that Jesse asked, it almost feels like the question that Jesse asked, it almost feels like the technology is a bit of a red herring, when in fact what we're trying to do is connect not Legos but people. And I think that's one thing that we've really discovered through hybrid pedagogy with the chats that we do on Twitter and MOOC MOOC, which, by the way, MOOC MOOC started out in the Canvas LMS and migrated to Twitter, to the point where it always had Twitter as a component, but it came to the point where this last one was entirely on Twitter and Google Hangouts, like this. What we found was that it was the people the connections between people that were inspiring the learning, that were making things happen, and that's what the computer was good at, was connecting all of us, because it was a conduit or a window through which we could get to each other.
And I'm glad that you guys cited John and Donaldson's piece on the maker movement and the rebirth of constructionism in this week's announcement, because I think this all goes back to giving students the ability to make stuff. And having the computer do less of the making and letting the students do more of the making. And I think in that regard, I'm okay with the computer being less easy to use, getting out of the student's way in other regards, but making the students do the creation of the stuff. And when computers step in and try to make the making, or do the making for them, like the templates and such, that eliminates students' abilities to create and add to the product.
I think, oh, go ahead, Maha, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it depends on where you want them to create. If you want them to focus on the content of something, sometimes giving to, letting them have to do a lot of bells and whistles stuff isn't necessarily the right thing to do, but it depends on what you're trying to achieve, but also what the students want to do. So I was just going to, about templates. Go ahead, Audrey.
So I think that this is an answer to this question that you get when you ask a bunch of humanities people what matters, the people or the computers. And I think I'll just say that I don't know. I'm certain that Seymour would agree that the people matter, but that he would also be adamant that the computer itself is a powerful machine that's a vehicle for helping students understand thinking. And there's something actually, we can't actually sort of erase away the power of the computer, particularly when it comes to thinking concretely about something that's typically taught as abstract, and that's math. So I do think that the computer really does matter here. I think for the humanities folks, we're probably less interested in the mathiness of what it models for us, but I think that I think it is still underlying our ability to at least connect. So.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and I would just like to draw an analogy with something going on in popular culture, which is the controversy that raged yesterday about the white, gold, blue, black dress.
It's still raging today. Oh my
Well,
God.
I'm sure it is, but I was so enchanted to see this raging because I thought this issue is connecting all sorts of people all over the world. And people are weighing in with their opinions and making comments and so on. But what delighted me today were two events. One is the two little Legos that were dressed up in the different colors of dresses, and some of you probably seen that. The other is companies are hopping on this, and United Airlines posted a message showing an airplane with a gold stripe on it saying white and gold. And I just thought this was hilarious. This is a way of creating a kind of community of good feeling about something that's at least a little more interesting to me than cute cat videos.
Speaking of Apple products.
Well, it's sort of fascinating the degree to which we're talking about human connection, and we're talking about the computer, and all of our computers are interrupting this conversation in various ways. The degree to which my actual intimacy, there's a bit from the piece that we were looking at when I was looking for quotes where he talks about intimacy and he talks about feeling. I think it's actually a bit that I wish I could find really quickly, but I can't find it because he's talking about the thing Audrey was talking about, which is thinking, talking about the way the computer maps or helps us analyze thinking and how thinking happens. But he also throws the word feeling in there, which I think is interesting. That somehow, and so what I end up wondering is what computers have to do with feeling, and whether computers have anything to do with feeling, the extent to which we can actually use them for genuine connection, the extent to which we can use social media platforms for genuine connection.
Does anyone want to talk about HOW 9000 or the Facebook study of influencing people's moods by limiting the different kinds of moods that they were able to see in their timeline? I think that computers can be used to manipulate or facilitate feeling. And I think that even settings like the one that we're in right now, we are causing one another to laugh or roll our eyes or make people on Twitter get scared whenever we talk about making MOOC or LMSs harder to use and that sort of thing. There's this ability to engage one another, but through the computer, I don't know. I don't see. I see the connection as being the thing that the computer does, and the rest of it is the human through the computer.
But also, I mean, back to that Facebook study, it's which connections get put in front of you first and what that means. But then if we're moving on to the issue of equity and gender and all that, then who gets more power to connect more easily with other people?
Mm-hmm.
That's another issue. So my life as an online person has to be in English for me to be someone in the EdTech field. If I was talking in Arabic, I wouldn't know what vocabulary to use because nobody talks about EdTech in Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, again, the gender thing, like how much, and I mean, Audrey maybe would talk more about how she has to handle that because I'm not under that much threat. But there are a lot of women who are under threat because of technology, because of their high profiles on technology, that they wouldn't have been probably if they hadn't had that life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the degree to which that keeps someone like Audrey, or maybe any of us, from being full thinking and feeling people via these different media. One of the bits that Papert writes is he says, first, I remember that no one told me to learn about differential gears. Second, I remember that there was feeling, love, as well as understanding in my relationship with the gears. So, I mean, there's a real kind of techno-utopianism. There's sort of a techno-utopian side of Papert, which I kind of adore because he's at the same time pushing back on it. It reminds me a lot of Howard Rheingold, the same sort of thing, this kind of push and pull. This, I adore the thing, but I can't help but step back and raise an eyebrow at the thing.
It's also a love of learning, right? I mean, and I think that this is what he reminds us as well, is that children love to learn. Children love to learn, and then they go to school, and then they suddenly hate learning. So I've got all my books. You all have your Apple products. I've got Mindstorms. I have the Children's Machine and the Connected Family. Like, this is the trio of Seymour's books, wow. Right? All on paper. But he talks in the Children's Machine, which is his second book that came out in '93. He has this difference between schoolers and yearners, and he talks about how yearning is this deep, deep love of learning, and I think we see that in his anecdote about the gears, right? There was something about the gears that were really beautiful to him, that he had a deep intellectual but also emotional affinity for, and that's that love of learning is a yearning. School, when it comes to learning, has a different sort of feeling to it. And I think that what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to have and cultivate more yearners. And instead we have these institutions that, unfortunately, when it comes to learning, force us to become schoolers. And that actually, that is a different sort of experience, and that actually leads to a different sort of way of knowing. It's a different sort of epistemology, and it is an epistemology that I think that women, people of color, people from other nationalities, different classes struggle with as well. So it's not just that we struggle in technology, but we struggle in school.
I think that's a good point, and I would just say that one of the things that benefited me most in life was that my uncle gave me a little GENIAC computer kit in 1957, and I literally put it together with my own hands. So I made my first computer, and it was possible in those days, and maybe what we need are more toys for children of that sort of thing so they can make their own computers to start with.
Yeah, and I don't think that the Lego Mindstorms kit is actually doing that. I actually even had this sort of moment in my brain where I thought, ooh, I want to go out and get that Lego Mindstorms kit. But I know that it's not at all what I would imagine or fantasize that it might be.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the books that I've been worrying about sorry.
Say that again, Audrey.
It's pretty cool.
Okay, maybe I will get it. I'm totally going to Target after that. You're all going to see pictures on Twitter of me with my new Mindstorms kit.
Way to ruin the moment, Audrey.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, one of the things that was going on when I was starting to do my computer applications in the humanities in the late 60s was that several people who were themselves professors as well were trying very hard to work on artificial intelligence, and it couldn't go anywhere at that point, in part because the computers weren't powerful enough to move things forward. And I'm thinking maybe we're at that turning point again now where AI is going to become something that's not only worth doing but something that is now possible in this physical world that we're in. We'll see.
My undergraduate thesis was a neural network that evolves. And I thought that that was a really good example of how, that's how learning should be. It just teaches itself. You don't actually teach it. It teaches itself, and it evolves, and it improves in order to get better at what it does. Of course, there are set parameters because it's still a computer thing. But, what Papert talks about is also that he's not, like, for example, he talks about what gears were to him, and he says that for each child it will be a different thing. And how much room is there in school for each child to follow their own interest and their own passion, so that they're learning with the thing or the topic that they find affection and affinity with. That's I think what's missing in schools. And I still think computers can help with that, even with what we have now. I'm just throwing that out.
I certainly agree with the challenge part of what you just said. It's something I've been struggling with this semester in particular, is going back to the schoolers versus yearners thing that Audrey mentioned, trying to convince my students to take on more of that yearning mindset, and to shun that schooler identity that they've had ingrained in them over the past several years. I'm finding it remarkably challenging this semester to find new ways to bring that out. I want to talk more about that. I'm running out of time. I want you to solve
I think that this sort of leads to thinking about the agency question and thinking about the critical part in critical digital pedagogy. Is there a way that the digital can actually enable critical pedagogy? There's a lot of talk. There's the quote that I had in the little announcement from Sherry Turkle and Papert, where they argue that the role of feminist studies in the nascent computer culture is to promote the recognition of diversity and how we think about and appropriate formal systems and encourage the acceptance of our profound human connections with our tools. And then the question I had there is what role do race, sex, gender, and sexuality play in our consideration of how we relate to machines and how we talk about educational technologies? I think something that's interesting in this conversation is that we have it feels a little rare when you're talking among educational technologists to have 6 people in a hangout, none of which are straight white men. And so how do we create environments where this kind of space can be? I got a thumbs up from Maha for coming out on camera.
You actually just outed all of us, is what you did.
Yeah. Thanks, Jesse.
Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah.
On the internet, no one knows.
No one knows you're gay on the internet.
But no, that was actually going to be one of the things that I was going to bring up whenever you were talking about identity and gender and sexuality and all that, is that what comes to my mind first is how people are able to present themselves however they want, to an extent. And there are always times when that doesn't happen, and there are always ways in which that won't work. But I know that there's a large number of argument out there, or a large amount of argument out there, that people can just pretend to be whomever online. And I'm not sure I quite buy that. To be particularly effective and engaged online, I think you can wear different hats, but I don't think there's a way to not be who you are. So yes, Jesse just outed us, Sean, but I mean, it's not like there's nothing out there already saying that.
Yeah. Well, I felt like I could do it because you had already outed yourself in a public piece of writing within the last year. So
I did a mental check real quick to make sure that applied to Sean too.
It applied to all of us. So, but the thing that's interesting is that I think that you're right. There's a degree to which, so I used to be completely not very personal on social media, and about a year ago, not quite a year ago, I got married very publicly on Twitter. And I had actually never up to that point been all of that revealing about my personal life and my personal self on Twitter. And the interesting thing to me is that the second that I did that, I felt a different kind of agency in the space. And so I'm not necessarily suggesting that everyone needs to get married publicly on Twitter. It was a little weird.
It was a great picture, though.
Yeah, but but there's a way in which that is the second that I did that, I did feel like I could be a fuller agent in the space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we think about, to come back to education, I think that that's, I think that that's what we really struggle with in education technology, is that we have these tools that are really designed to work in a system that is actually designed to not give students agency, right? To not see students as subjects and of drivers of their own learning, to see them as objects of the system, objects of the technology. And so, how do we really sort of undermine this legacy and give agency back to learners? And I think that technology is potentially a way to do that. Right at the same time, we have to recognize that technology is also this powerful device that is reinscribing in new ways some of these older object relations that we sort of have that we have with our students.
Any other thoughts on that? Well, we're coming close to the end of the hour. Jesse, is there anything you want to sort of finish up with, or Audrey, Maha, Chris, RL, anything you want to sort of add here at the last minutes?
Throw something out real quick. There was, and unfortunately, I don't remember where I saw it, and I don't have enough time to go find it. But the distinction between technology as a tool and technology as an outcome, and that if technology is used as an outcome, then we're doing it wrong. But I think that even technology as a tool might be doing it wrong, and we need to change the language again to technology as an opportunity, where if we give students the technology to use as a tool, then what, they start seeing all their, you give them a hammer, they see all their problems as nails. If we give them technology and say, this is a tool, they start expecting everything to fit that particular pattern. But if instead it's, hey, there's this opportunity there called technology, go use it as seems appropriate, I think that might help change our perspective on it a bit. Give them a bit more freedom too.
And I think also thinking of technology as a text that we analyze, and a text that we're constantly analyzing as we use it. Because the thing about most tools is that they tell you what to do with them. A hammer tells you what to do with it. There's lots of things you can do with a hammer, but unless you do that sort of critical thinking about the nature of the hammer, you're unlikely to do anything but pound in nails with it.
And so is that what makes it so complicated, that it's both a tool that we need to analyze as a text and a space in which we exist that we need to analyze as a text at the same time? And so we've got that kind of inside and outside analysis that needs to sort of coexist to understand really how our relationship with it works.
Mm-hmm. And a space that you can hack, so you can take the nail and do something else with it as long as you know that you have the freedom to sort of do that. Can I just say thank you to Janine DeBase, who's been tweeting really nicely in the background a lot of the things that we've been saying. Hi, Janine.
Hi, Janine. We love you. RL, did you have a point?
Well, I wanted to follow up on what Chris said, and I agree with that. And Jesse, you may remember this experience when we were teaching Shakespeare in the classroom, and we had chat rooms set up within the classroom, and the students who would refuse to talk in the huge group of 25 would blab their heads off when they were typing in the chat rooms. It was a way for reticent students to come into their own as intellectuals, and that was one very good use of the technology that we had. It worked very well in that particular instance.
Mm-hmm.
My final notes will just be as a reminder to everyone to read as much Papert as they can. I think that he was such a visionary for a vision of education technology, a vision of education that we really haven't fulfilled, and I would say actually we're sort of getting farther and farther away from this ability to put. Now we have these powerful devices in all of our hands, and it's sort of demonstrated that that's still not enough, that we have to do a lot more to actually help students have the capacity to sort of drive some of their learning themselves, and not just be, not as we started it out with the computer programming the child. How can the learner be in charge of building ideas with these machines?
As long as reading doesn't have to be on paper, I'm okay.
No, I was about to say everyone should go to their local independent bookstore and buy it in paperback. All 3 books.
I'm going to admit to not owning any of them in paper. I have my nice digital copies of them. I did own one in paper at one point in my life, but I don't own it anymore.
This one actually comes with a CD-ROM.
Oh.
That's how you can tell that it's an old book.
Well, I think actually that comment from Audrey, in a way, is a good wrap-up to what this entire course has been about. It's been about this sort of desire to look. We're constantly looking forward, and this is a theme of Audrey's work, and in a way, her work inspired us putting this unit at the end of this course. But really, the theme of the entire thing has been look back as much as you look forward, that it's never about talking about the future. The thing is, John Dewey, Emerson, Bell Hooks, Emily Dickinson, Mary Shelley, all of these people understood the future in some ways better than we do. And so there's a way in which looking back, I think in a way, like, what text do I start with when I think about educational technology? I start with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And so there's a way in which going back to some of those origin texts, which I think Papert has been kind of lost in the midst of the conversation that has sort of seemed to think that it's moved beyond him, but in a way it's actually regressed.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming today, and for everybody who participated the last 6 weeks in MOOC MOOC. It's been actually one of the best MOOCs we've ever run. It's been fantastic and really informative and a lot of fun. So I just want to thank everybody and appreciate you coming by. So yeah.
Good seeing everybody again.
Thank you.
Before I hit stop broadcast on this, I am going to put a little plug for Digital Pedagogy Lab, digitalpedagogylab.com, and a plug towards that person on the other end of the Hangout who is the keynote at Digital Pedagogy Lab, Audrey Watters, August 10th through 14th, digitalpedagogylab.com. Gotta sell. You gotta sell. I mean, we're talking about marketing. We started with marketing, and oh wait, Legolas says.
Go to Digital Pedagogy Lab.
Pedagogy Lab.
We need to find a way to distribute Play-Doh. All right, I've got a mission now.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.